Hey there, this is Zeke from CodeForDesigners.com. I'm here with a Level Up Friday. The goal behind these videos is to give you something new that you can learn over the course of just your lunch break. Today, I want to talk about something near and dear to my heart, BEM. It's a CSS organization methodology that is almost kind of like the grandfather of them all. You see other organization methodologies use little bits of it. So let's go to the computer and let's really talk about this. BEM is designed to help you create reusable components. So in order to dive into this, let's actually talk about what a component is, at least in terms of CSS. I've created an example here of a component called card. What that component really is doing is creating this little sort of teaser. You can see it has a bit of an animation that kicks in. All in all, this really could just be like a teaser for an article. It could be like a little ad. But you'll see as you're looking at this component, there are a few things in it. There's an image right here. There's some text. Maybe this is the headline. There's even this little button or link to learn more. So we've got a few things, but they're all related. They all create this component that I'm calling card. So before I dive too far into this specific component, let's back out a little bit and walk you through BEM. BEM stands for Block Element Modifier. And to explain that concept, I'm just going to start creating a few things and you'll see how this works. So I'm creating a div and I'm just going to call this block. What this block kind of represents, if you're creating a component, is the sort of outermost HTML element of that component. So we have a block, and to help us see it a little in CSS, I'm actually just going to go in and create an outline. I'll just create it in red. And I'm going to add just a little bit of padding too to make it a little easier to see our outline. Let's give it 20. We've got plenty of room. As you can imagine, in any sort of CSS organization methodology, you're going to want to be able to reuse components. So I'm just going to duplicate this block. And let's add just a little bit of margin here, so that we have some separation between them. Perfect. Now let's say inside of our block, maybe we had an image, or maybe we had some, like a text sort of thing, like our card. In BEM, that concept is called an element. So our block was that sort of outermost HTML element of our component. Now we have elements inside of it. And in a BEM naming convention, we just call those elements. So I'm just going to add that inside. So in BEM, the way we show that we have an element nested inside of our block is to use these double underscores. Now they certainly look strange, but they're really clear to other developers that this isn't a mistake, it's not a typo, you're not using this to just separate words. This was an intentional choice to help signify where this element should be used. And so you can have multiple elements, of course. We've got element 1, element 2, it's not going to make a difference. So let's just add that element in. I'm going to give it a similar treatment. Let's give it an outline, 1 pix. But instead, I'm actually just going to dash it and still leave it red. And we'll also give this a padding of 20 pixels. Oops. And I need to name that element. Great, so you see our element now. It's this dashed line box inside of our block. Now let's say we wanted, to have a different version of that. Let's say this particular element, maybe we wanted it to be like important, or something like that. In BEM naming convention, this will be a modifier. And you see we've used these double dashes actually to signify that, yes, this is a modifier. We're intending to just make a slight change to this element, not create a whole new one. So in my example, I'm just going to make a small change. I'm just going to change the outline X dash to blue. And so you can see how this might work. For example, if you had an element that was, let's say, a button, and you wanted to change the color of that button, you could use a modifier to do that. The modifier isn't restricted to just being used on the element of the block. You can also use a modifier on the block. So for example, if I wanted my block to also do the same thing, let's just change the outline to blue. I'm going to go in there and change that outline to blue. And again, let's add the modifier there. And so only the one with the class of modifier gets changed. Now, what's great about this is you can go in behind another developer and see instantly what they were trying to do. You can tell kind of the structure of these components. You can tell when someone's just simply modifying a class versus creating a new one. To drive this example home a little bit, let's stop working in this sort of hypothetical space, and I'll take you back to that card demo. So here you can see we've got our card in place, right? Our card is sort of functioning as that block. Inside of that block, we have a media. Now, depending on how far you want to go in terms of nesting depth, I have something called card, just _image. You could actually name that card _media image. That would certainly indicate that you intended to nest the image under media. Some people, though, look at that nesting depth and try not to go too far, at least in terms of what you write in your CSS classes, because they can get really long. You can see this card _media _image already feels a little long. And imagine if you had another sub element beneath it, or if this name was pretty long. This is something you can certainly negotiate with your team. How far do we want to allow our nesting depth to go? At least in terms of writing it into our classes. Certainly for me, I feel like knowing that an element is under a block is really helpful. But if I have a style guide or some sort of like a pattern library, maybe I don't need all of the nesting depths to be shown, in the CSS class. Again, something for you to kind of figure out with your team. For my purposes, I'm choosing to only allow myself to go one level deep here. So, as you can imagine, if this was a set of articles that we were linking to, someone might want to have more than one of them on a page. And in fact, they may want these cards styled differently if they're like the big featured articles versus, sort of the rest of the articles in a list. So I'll show you what that looks like. Cool. Just
cleaning up a little bit of styles there. So for here, you could see when we have these sort of featured stories, they get these sort of side-by-side views now, just big cards. And our smaller, less featured stories get these sort of smaller layouts. To make that work, of course, I've got a few more things in here, but let's really focus on those card components again. So you see we have our sort of regular cards, nothing different. You know, it's card element, a card block. It has a sub element called media. Really nothing's changed here. But what's different is when we start to look at these other cards, and I've modified the block to have something called thumb. And so what that does is actually just, tells me, okay, this element I can treat differently. This block I can treat differently. And so that's where you're getting sort of the smaller thumbnail images. You're getting a rearrangement of the layout. And that rearrangement of layout really, it extends down to mobile as well. Arguably, that's a little too tiny. We'd probably change that, but this is just for an example's sake. In our CSS, I'll just scroll down. I've got some things to lay out a grid here as well. But when we start getting down to the card, you'll see that the way I'm using that modifier class of card thumb is really to look for it only in the case of card. Again, some people argue that you could simply just do card thumb. This certainly works, but this relies heavily on the authoring order. So the order that the CSS appears in your finished style sheet. This is sort of like an extra security blanket. I know it's only going to apply when we're talking about card. And then, you'll see the same of card info. And what's great about using these modifiers to me is you really only want to go in and change literally only the things that apply to this change. Don't change anything else. So for my card info, I knew I was previously displaying these things as flex. So I needed to stop displaying the card info as a sort of like a flex box area. You'll see the card info is here. It's what's wrapping our title and that little learn more link. So I stopped displaying it as flex because I no longer needed it to be side by side. I needed it to be, sort of top aligned, like nested over the top of each other. And yes, you can do that with Flexbox, but it's kind of unnecessary in that scenario. I also needed to acknowledge that, this card info now, because of what the card is doing to it, displaying it as flex, also needed a few flex things set on it. Changing the percentage that it can occupy, giving it the ability to grow, those sorts of things. But that's really what you're looking for when you're working with these sorts of concepts. Certainly as you look at the code, if you just sort of look at the class names of all of my HTML elements, you can kind of get a rhythm for what's going on. All right, now this is a card. This is definitely a block. This is going to be a component kind of thing. This one happens to be being modified. You can see that with those double dashes. There's something called card media, which is part of the card. Great. You really can see this visually. That's pretty much all there is to BEM. It's a really simple concept, but powerful. This will definitely help your team stay organized. Working in this way is going to help you think about your site in components more, which is great because breaking these things up into smaller, more reusable chunks of code, it's also going to help you really, really think about All right, how does this component work on this particular browser? Is this component accessible? Working in those small bits really is going to help. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out, either through the @Code4Designers Twitter or the Facebook page. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I possibly can. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, please do. That helps me know that I'm creating content that you like. And most of all, happy coding.